quantum physics, objects are not determined things, objects are possibilities. Possibilities of what? Possibilities for consciousness to choose from. Can God be talked about in terms of science, which always analyzes, reduces things to other things? God is supposed to be this whole thing, whole enchilada? How can we ever talk about God in scientific terms, let alone try to find scientific evidence for God? This is a very good question. This evolutionary step is completely essential for even basic survivability of human beings on this planet. We have literally managed to train a whole generation of kids on the idea that everything is material. If you hear the message of quantum physics, then all you have to do in order to see that there is evidence for God in the science that we are doing now is to recognize that, well, how is God related to consciousness? That's all you need to know. There is very definitive scientific evidence for the existence of God. And then my question to you, so what are you doing about it? I knew that a new science had to be built. A new science that is a science based on the primacy of consciousness. Contrary to what every other physicist, including David Bohm, used to think, that science must be done objectively. I knew that the correct way of doing science must encompass both objective and the subjective. I knew that a new science is going to come. The culture was very spiritual. We literally had almost every other day a celebration of some kind of worshipping some kind of god or goddess, stories, myths, and then of course we would eat this wonderful prasadam. My father used to teach me the Upanishads, the Hindu treatises, philosophical treatises that lays out the nature of reality more or less, defining what I call monastic idealism. I do not think I understood much of it at that time, but it left a very strong impression on me. Also the struggle for independence that was going on simultaneously. Then I was only 9 years old when the big riot happened in the vicinity of where I grew up. My father was sort of like a Brahmin guru. He had some disciples and they used to come and take his advice. But having grown up in that household, somehow had the opposite effect on me. My family house had a big fruit orchard in the backyard. So one could call it a sort of a mini jungle. I loved to be in that jungle and reenact the mythical stories of the Mahabharata, the Indian epic. So it's full of bliss of this undivided consciousness that we're talking about, this non-local consciousness. The sense of separateness disappeared, although not exactly in the mystical sense. I'm not saying that I had lived in Samadhi, but there was a kind of a flow where I would go, I would not feel separate from the environment. That's where the bliss comes from, because what is bliss but when we are feeling a continuity with the whole?
In response to the growing international attention to his work, Goswami has been involved in numerous speaking engagements worldwide. He is the author of many books translated into 9 languages. His books include the highly regarded university textbook Quantum Mechanics, which serves as the standard introduction in many universities to the essential mathematics of quantum physics, as well as Goswami's later books, which focus on his more innovative and mystical interpretations. Having retired Professor Emeritus of Theoretical Quantum Physics from the University of Oregon, where he taught since 1968, Amit is currently a teacher at the Holmes Institute, the Philosophical Research Institute in Los Angeles, as well as Unipaz in Portugal.
Long journey in science, from undergraduate to graduate to postgraduate to becoming a professor at Case Western Reserve first and to University of Oregon. And I was a materialist then.
Born in India, Amit Goswami left the traditional religious settings of his childhood to study physics. He received his doctorate in nuclear physics from Calcutta University in 1964.
In 1973, I had a sort of incident which brought me back to asking those philosophical questions about the nature of reality. You see, the way we do physics, this is very important to recognize that today most people, most physicists, do not get to look at fundamental questions even of physics, let alone nature of reality, because the paradigm is so developed that the questions that they'll deal with are more like what Christian monks used to do in the medieval ages. Questions like how many angels can dance on a pen, that kind of question. Not that bad, but I'm joking, but still, it is like that as far as the importance as to the nature of reality is concerned.
His research on creativity and how it relates to quantum theory via the notion of a discontinuous leap, combined with his resurgent interest in monistic idealism, has led Amit to his unique and maverick insights into quantum physics and to his positing a solution to the quantum measurement paradox.
I was at a conference giving a talk, and all day I felt very jealous that other people are giving better talks and they are getting more attention. This jealous energy just wouldn't go away. During the entire evening when I was at a party and everybody was talking, but I was just suffering from my jealousy, although I was pretending to participate. So at about 1 o'clock in the morning, after finishing an entire packet of Tums, I just gave up and went outside. And the cool breeze from the ocean hit me right on the face. And a thought came, I still don't know where it came from. But at that time, it was just such a strange thing to think this way. The thought was, why do I live this way? Why do I live this way? And I knew that I have to change. I knew, I just knew. When it seemed that life itself can be explained in terms of molecular movement, the concept of that everything can be matter, all of our internal experiences as well as external experiences can be explained in terms of material concepts alone took shape. And this is what we call materialist science. What do we mean materialist science? Materialist science takes it as its basic axiom that everything is matter. Be that being our feeling of subjective experience, be that being our experience of emotions or our experience of thinking, all being is fundamentally just matter. Majority of scientists today, they think that the world is built in a way which can be called bottom up, which is upward causation. I call it upward causation because cause rises in the material version of the construction of reality. Cause rises from the elementary particles at base to more and more composite, atoms, molecules, cells, and finally to the brain. And there is no cause anywhere else. Many neurophysiologists are now giving out the idea that there actually is a spot in the midbrain, the new G spot. If you excite that spot, then you get experience of God. And it's not even wrong. You do get some experience. But the wrongness that enters is a very interesting assumption that is at the heart of most of materialist work. Whenever two things happen together, a subtle experience happens in conjunction with the material, immediately they jump into the conclusion that it can be only one way. The material must be causing the subtle experience. To reduce our internal experience to movement of molecules and atoms, this reductionistic program does not go far enough to explain all of the internal subtle phenomena. So let's concentrate on how do religions look at God for a second. Again, when you first look at it, you find that Christians give one answer, Hindus give another answer, Muslims give a very different answer, and Buddhists say there is no God at all. All religions agree that there is some cause outside of these material causes, and they call that downward causation. And the phrase is very appropriate because it is just what we need to complement upward causation from matter. Second thing that religions posit is also a concept that contradicts the standard science squarely. And this is the idea that aside from gross material body, aside from the gross material object, there is a subtle body, a subtle world, consisting of subtle objects. Understand the subtle body as not gross, not material. What is the aspect of material bodies that make it gross? It's the shareability of material bodies. We all can experience material bodies simultaneously. We can look at it, it seems external to us. Material experience, sensory experience is shareable, external. But aside from this external experience, we do have what we call internal experience, private. I can think, but you cannot think my thoughts. But you also think, that much I know, because you can share your thoughts with me. I can feel, and you also feel, but we cannot share our feelings. And I can intuit, you can also intuit, but we cannot share our intuitive experiences. This non-shareability makes the internal as private. This private nature of it is what makes it subtle. Gross, we can all together experience, we can develop a consensus reality about the gross, about the material world. We cannot develop a similar consensus reality about what is internal to us. This has caused the gross division of subtle, gross, mind, matter. These are just a dichotomy that is imposed upon us by our experiences. We cannot deny it. Now, whereas materialist science says that there is no reality to the subtle, subtle is part of the gross itself, what spiritual traditions pose is that now the subtle is as much part of reality in its own right as is the gross. Immediately the idea arises that there is a white bearded majestic fellow sitting on a throne in the sky somewhere, and that's who is doling out downward causation on people, making judgments who will go to heaven and who will go to hell. True, but that is not the only image that we have to subscribe to. This is a straw god that materialists set up, and then they disprove it, and then they think that they are going somewhere. So aside from upward causation, there is downward causation from God, if you will. This is something that all religions would have us believe. Religions always say, do good, be good. Simple message. Practice some virtues. In today's world, you can see the benefit of that. So this one we can all agree on. Unfortunately, of course, there is a difficulty, which is that good for you may not be good for me. So, agree that there are some difficulties here which have to be worked out. When we recognize that there is communality in how religions speak of God, what religions think of what is God, then we can say that we have framed into words what can be called the essence of spirituality. And then also we can ask the question, is there science behind it? Now the essence of quantum physics. Quantum physics is the physics of possibilities. Quantum physics says that every object is not a determined thing, but consists of possibilities. Immediately we ask, whose possibilities? Well, possibilities of consciousness. For what? Possibilities for consciousness to choose from. When consciousness is not choosing, quantum objects behave like waves of possibility. They spread like any other ordinary wave. But whenever consciousness looks, the waves collapse and become objects of conscious experience. Everything that you experience happens like this. Not only material objects, but thoughts. There too, meaning propagates like waves, and then we capture a particular meaning, and that one becomes an ambient thought at the moment. Same thing for feeling, same thing for even intuition. Those bodies that spiritual traditions propose, those bodies become our experiences as consciousness takes possibilities from each of those bodies and converts them into actual events. If consciousness is able to convert waves of possibility into actual event, then what is the nature of consciousness? First, let's dispense with the idea that consciousness can be a material consciousness. I'm sure that some of you think, and I don't blame you for thinking that, because at the schools we almost get such ideas today. We almost get such ideas that brain is everything and consciousness is a brain phenomenon. But look at what happens if consciousness were a brain phenomenon. In quantum physics, we have possibilities, right? So we have possible elementary particles creating possible atoms, giving us possible molecules, making possible neurons, making possible brain, giving you possible consciousness. Can possible consciousness convert possibilities of elementary particles into actual events? If you couple possibility to possibility, have you tried that? Let's try it. Everybody think of possible money in your bank. And you think of possible cars. Will that ever get you an actual car in your garage? Possibility coupled to possibility can only give us more possibility, never actuality. So we call this a paradox. We call this a paradox, quantum measurement paradox. But calling it a paradox just begs the question. Paradox is pointing out to the inadequacy of the materialist worldview. What is the correct worldview? If you think consciousness is a dual agent, different from matter, but nevertheless they are two separate things, then also there is a problem. This problem is called dualism. How does consciousness interact with matter? If you think about it, if two things don't have anything in common, they cannot interact. Even men and women who are made of the same material cannot communicate. So you can readily extrapolate if things are made of different stuff, then they just could not communicate at all. This is called dualism. Dual objects cannot communicate without a mediator. Dualism is not the answer. Materialism isn't the answer. What is the answer then? What is consciousness? What is its relationship with matter? What does the idea that consciousness can choose actuality from material possibilities tell us? There is a way of looking at it which is paradox-free. If we can think the radical thinking, radical thought, that consciousness is the ground of being, not matter. Consciousness is the ground of being, and matter consists of possibilities of consciousness. In other words, we are saying that consciousness is not made of brain, but brain is made of consciousness. If you make such a radical switch, then what happens? Then immediately you see that conscious choice is no longer a dualistic action of consciousness on matter. Dualism is not necessary anymore, because consciousness is choosing only a possibility which is itself, its own possibility. No effort is needed, no action is needed, it's just choice. But be it as it may, as you switch from one meaning of the picture to the other, please ask yourself, am I doing anything to the picture? And the answer comes, no, of course not. I'm just choosing. I'm recognizing by shifting my head a little, shifting my context of looking a little. I'm just choosing by recognizing one facet vis-a-vis the other facet. See how simple it is? No dualism is involved because no doing is involved. No transfer of energy is involved. In this way, consciousness can choose out of material possibilities the actual event of experience without dualism to bother us. And a major problem of quantum physics is solved. When somebody hears the idea that we, consciousness after all is we are conscious, we are part of that conscious being, and when you say consciousness chooses out of quantum possibilities, we get the idea that, well, hey, we choose our own reality. It's great. I'll choose a reality which gives me right away a BMW. I don't know how good creators you are, but in the 70s, and some of you will relate to this, we used to play with this. There were organizations which used to teach how to manifest things. And some people would seriously meditate on manifesting a Cadillac. But we think, we intend, we meditate, we wait, no car in our garage. Why is that? So they used to teach them how to manifest a parking space for their car. Little bit easier, but still, nobody got 100% success in that. What they were missing is a subtlety of the nature of consciousness. Material objects are possibilities. To manifest the possibilities, what do we need to do? Consciousness is subtle. It's not our immediate consciousness that we experience. The immediate consciousness that I experience is called my ego. It is choosing from possibilities, and that makes it actuality. That sounds like all you need to do is to intend. All you need to do is to think, and that is intention. But that is the wrong way of thinking. We are intending in the ordinary state of our consciousness. And there is a catch here. Consciousness does not choose in the ordinary state of consciousness. In my ego, I have very limited choice. We have choice, but the choice is like, what flavor of ice cream do you like, chocolate or vanilla? We have choice to choose vanilla or if we want chocolate, but it doesn't go very far from that. We don't really have freedom of choice that extends to choosing something really new. In other words, ego's choice is conditioned choice, depends on past learning, what you have already experienced. And in that ego, we don't choose, we can't. Conscious choice that consists of this conversion of possibility into actuality is more subtle. It happens at a subtle level of our consciousness. My favorite example of it is that a traffic light with two different possibilities, red and green. And you are approaching it from one direction, and your friend is approaching it from another direction. Being busy Americans, both of you want green. So who gets the green light? Who gets to choose? And when you ask that, you find that obviously both people's choice cannot become the actuality, because that will cause pandemonium in the world. We don't intend that, oh, God, give me a new car. Because then the second one, we have to say, oh, God, get everybody a new car. Can you imagine what will happen if all 6 billion people get a new car? It's not practical. So how does the choice happen then? Who gets to choose? Who gets to choose? This becomes a paradox. Who gets to choose? Now, there is a philosophy called solipsism, which is the philosophy that you are the only reality and everybody else is the figment of your imagination. Let me illustrate it by telling you the story of the Hollywood woman who meets a friend on Sunset Boulevard and becomes very excited, says, let's catch up with each other's news. So they go to a coffee house, and the woman talks and talks and talks. In half an hour, she becomes suddenly aware, oh, I'm talking about myself all this time. Let's talk about you. What do you think of me? Only this person's consciousness is valid. Everybody else is figment of her imagination. And you can relate to that. I mean, we all feel this way sometimes. We would like to feel this way sometimes at least. But the problem is that it's not a solution of the paradox, because everybody feels that way. In that philosophy, the problem is solved once again, because you get to choose. You are the head honcho of your experience, of your world. Unfortunately, everybody thinks that way. Your friend also thinks that way. So the problem of who gets to choose just gets shifted. Who gets to be the head honcho? Is there any other way to solve the paradox? It turns out that there is. Now, you know, mystics talk about consciousness in this way sometimes, because they say that, well, it is consciousness that creates reality, God that creates reality. The name God is often invoked to denote consciousness in its creative aspect. The solution that quantum physics reached, solution that frees us from paradoxes, is very similar to what the mystics say, because we are coming to the conclusion that choice happens from non-local consciousness. So it is this non-local consciousness, we can call it quantum consciousness if you will, that is the equivalent of what mystics call God. Behind our individual eyes, there is a cosmic eye, a cosmic consciousness, an interconnected consciousness. That's who we really are. Not what ordinary people sometimes think of God as, because ordinary people's thinking often is a dualistic God, God separate from the world. But the mystic is not talking like that. Mystic is saying that the non-local consciousness in the process of creating becomes not only the object that one observes, but also the subject. There is nothing but consciousness. Both the subject and the object are coming from consciousness itself. So there is no real dualism. The duality that we see, subject-object separateness, is an appearance. We are positing that the brain is essential, observer is essential for the possibilities to convert themselves into an actual event. But the observer itself is also a possibility when you think of the observer as a brain. So we are back to that question, and this time slightly differently. The brain is essential for collapse of the possibilities into actual event, but the collapse is essential for the brain to be real, to be manifest brain for the observer. There seems to be a circularity in the logic. This circularity, called tangled hierarchy, is crucial to appreciate. There is another way of thinking of this whole thing that we are missing. And quantum physics is forcing us down that road. It's forcing us to recognize that we don't choose in our individuality that we call the ego. Instead, there is a unity behind us. We are all connected in some place where there is this cosmic consciousness engulfing everything. If choice happens in that cosmic consciousness, then that cosmic consciousness can be completely objective and impartial, and can choose giving you and your friend equal portions of green light. And yet, it can deserve special treatment of those cases where there is an emergency, where there is a creative urgency. For example, you are taking your sick friend to the hospital. We do experience special green lights all the time, things cooperating in inexplicable ways in such emergencies. Consciousness leaves room for such creative occurrences, and yet consciousness can become very deterministic, very lawful in terms of dealing with the general average situation. This is why quantum mechanics is constructed in such a way that for large number of events, the average answer holds. This is why quantum science is predictive. It has predictability power, and it is this power that makes quantum physics so powerful. And yet, quantum physics leaves the room that for an individual choice, consciousness does retain creative choice. It's a little bit subtle. That's why manifestation doesn't always work. We have to get into an altered state of consciousness. Then we can do a lot with our intention. And there is experimental data proving that. I got a call from this Mexican neurophysiologist, Jacobo Greenberg, who said to me that he has some very interesting data that he is not quite able to interpret, but I might be very interested in. So I said, what kind of data? He said, well, this is two people communicating without exchanging signals. This is called non-locality in quantum physics. Without local signals. signals going through space and time. If such communication is occurring, we would say that yes, these people are connected via non-local consciousness. I said yes, I would be very much interested. In fact, that's one of the predictions of the solution of quantum measurement theory that I have. And he said, I know. And so he invited me to come and check out his laboratory, check out his experimental setup. So I went to University of Mexico in Mexico City. I saw that indeed how the experiment was conducted, which was that two people meditate together for 20 minutes with the intention that they will have a non-local communication. Now, this interconnection to consciousness extends outside of space and time. It does not require a signal to communicate. That's the beauty of it. So two people meditate together for 20 minutes with the intention that they communicate non-locally, directly, without exchange of any signals. After the 20 minutes, they are separated, put in individual Faraday chambers. These are electromagnetically impervious chambers. They still maintain that meditative state of intention. Now their brains are connected to individual EEG machines, electroencephalogram. One subject, and only one subject, is shown a series of light flashes. This obviously produces electromagnetic activity in the brain, and this electrical activity is recorded in the brain waves in the EEG connected to the brain. From that, a potential can be extracted, which is called evoked potential evoked by the light flashes. The other subject in the meantime is just meditating. There is no light flash for him or her. But the EEG machine connected to the brain of the second observer, who doesn't see any light flashes, nevertheless depict a transferred potential very similar in both phase and strength to the evoked potential that the first observer's EEG gives us. How does electrical activity transfer from one brain to another without any electromagnetic connection, without any signal? The answer is quantum non-locality. The answer is that non-local consciousness collapses similar events in both brains because through their intention they have become correlated non-locally. There is no other way of understanding this result. Now for a while, scientists objected, okay, maybe Jacobo's methodology was not quite right, maybe there was something wrong with the statistics. But then in 1998, Peter Fenwick in London and his collaborators reproduced the results. The results were again reproduced by another couple of experiments in the early 2000s. The latest one was in 2004 by Liana Standish and her collaborators at Bastille University in Seattle. Brains can communicate non-locally, proving that consciousness is indeed non-local. It's cosmic. Consciousness that chooses from quantum possibilities making an actual event, consciousness that creates this universe of manifestation is indeed non-local consciousness. Now you can call it God if you like. You don't have to. It's objective. It's objective and it's scientific. After the Self-Aware Universe came out, I was invited to a radio show, a talk show, and the first question an old lady asked me this was, what happens when we die? And I didn't know. The very first question in my very first radio appearance, and I didn't know how to answer the question. So that perturbed me a lot. That how does a physicist answer the question, what happens when we die? I knew that it is not fair to say that we just die, because that would be a very materialist answer. I knew that that answer could not be correct, but I also did not know how to approach it. What survives death? I did not know. At that time, I just did not know. So then a series of things happened. Very interesting. During the year, a theosophist, an elderly gentleman, started coming to my office. Initially, he was concentrating on what I had to say about quantum physics, but very soon his real intention became clear. He was trying to preach theosophy to me. And one of the basic aspects of theosophy is this question, that we don't completely die when we die. A part of us survives, and we then reincarnate. And this part is what commonly called soul. Of course, everybody knows that. I also knew that. But can that be scientific? How does one formulate a science of the soul, a physics of the soul? A graduate student in philosophy came to my office one day, and she said that her boyfriend just died, and she's in deep mourning, and somehow somebody told her that I might be of some help. Now, what do I know, as quantum physicist, about helping somebody with mourning? I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I know nothing about how to help people with grieving. I told her that, but she wouldn't quit. This produced such an urgency in my psyche, I suppose, that a dream came very soon. I was sort of in between waking and sleeping, sort of lucid dreaming, you might say, and I started hearing a voice from the background. And the voice became louder and louder, and ultimately it became an admonition when I clearly heard it. And the words were, "The Tibetan Book of Dead is correct. It's your job to prove it." And I thought when I woke up, oh my God, it's my job to prove Tibetan Book of the Dead. I knew about Tibetan Book of the Dead. I even knew what it says in gist. But how does one scientifically describe the soul? Again, that very same question. This woman who was grieving for her boyfriend, she asked a question, and I don't really even remember what the question was. She asked a question, and all of a sudden it became clear to me that all the objections we have about a soul, or which esoteric traditions call a subtle body, like the theosophists call it a subtle body, compared to the gross body that material body is, this subtle body is not really dualistic when one thinks in terms of consciousness and its possibilities. And when consciousness collapses each of these possibilities, we get sensing, thinking, feeling, and intuiting. That mind and brain both are possibilities of consciousness immediately solves the problem. We have found the mediator. It's non-local consciousness which mediates the interaction of mind, brain, mind and physical, and the vital and the supramental. All are connected via consciousness. Vital energy is connected with the movement of morphogenetic field. When we feel a movement of the morphogenetic field, that is the blueprint of an organ, we feel that movement, and that is what we call a feeling. Now, why is these organs connected with these feelings? The organs are representations of the vital body, which has the body plans for making the organs. So a feeling must be connected with the functioning of the organ that made a representation of the morphogenetic field. So again, coming back to one of our well-known chakra points, take the heart chakra. Everybody wants to get energy in their heart. What is the heart chakra about? Well, primarily it's about romantic love. Why is it associated with love? Let's think about it. I said that there is always an organ there, and this organ that is there is not so much the heart, but the important organ is thymus gland. This thymus gland is major part of the immune system. And what is the immune system responsible for? It helps us to distinguish me and not me. So now suppose your immune system accepts somebody else, accepts another person as you. Correspondingly, we feel the vital energy of the morphogenetic field. That was the blueprint of that important thymus gland of the immune system. The feeling is of romantic love. You are mine, right? So in this way, vital energies are connected with our feelings. Very simply, look, I am in love with you if you are acceptable by my immune system. If we remember that if the heart chakra is fed with good vital energy, which is what we mean by keeping the heart chakra open. If we approach all our relationships with open heart chakra, positive emotions of love, what happens then? Automatically, we have an opportunity of approaching conflict in a new way. We grow up in the same culture, and we get used to interpreting meanings in the same way. There is a problem with that. The problem is that we can't get out of this conditioning very easily. I was giving you the example of ice cream. You get so used to having either chocolate or vanilla, chocolate mostly, that you don't even contemplate pineapple ice cream or peach. It's outrageous. It will be a revolution. This conditioning that makes the subtle bodies individual. It's not a structural subtle body, but a functional subtle body. We all function differently in our handling of the subtle. We think differently. We develop different kinds of characters, different kinds of conditioned habit patterns, and it is these patterns that transmigrate from one incarnation to another. But then how do we become creative ever? In those moments, lucid moments, when we are walking on the beach, when we are walking in the woods, in those very blissful moments, we do go into our preconscious. We don't shift our experience to the memories. And it is a wonderful lucid experience of that present moment, just that moment. This is the moment that is called the moment of Satori in Japanese, or moment of Samadhi in Hinduism. This is the moment when Christians would say that I became the Holy Spirit, or Holy Spirit was speaking through me. These are moments of cosmic awareness. We become aware that I am not isolated individual. I am the whole world. As Erwin Schrödinger, who was a physicist as well as a mystic, who had a mystical experience of that type, who declared, I am this whole world, comes on the basis of this kind of experience. The secret of creativity. We have method in this talk. First, we establish that consciousness is the ground of being. Second, we established, well, consciousness does not have just the material compartment, it has mental, vital, and supramental. And now we are considering the idea of how to explore these compartments beyond our conditioning. And creativity is our way. First stage is called preparation. This one you already know. You go to a lecture, you read a book. Preparation is getting acclimatized, familiar with what is already known. Then creativity researchers say that you just sit on it, incubation, like a bird sits on the egg doing nothing. This is a little bit hard to believe for a modern person who is convinced of a do lifestyle. You are basically convinced of the fact that doing is important and being is secondary. But that's not what these creativity researchers are finding. They are finding that being is as important, doing followed by being. Now, people didn't understand this for a long time until quantum physics came along and showed us how. Because doing means you convert possibility into actuality. In between doing, what happens? The possibilities grow and grow and grow and grow. Possibilities proliferate. Now, anybody knows if there are more possibilities to choose from, my chance of choosing the correct possibility that will answer my problem is better. Isn't that true? It's obvious. So therefore, we have to allow some time between episodes of doing. But you cannot allow too much time, because if you did, then you would be defocused completely. You will forget what the question was. This elder brother was a philosopher himself. I remember having discussions about questions like, does the electron have free will, with him when I was in graduate school. And we had vehement discussions. He was in favor of, yes, of course, electrons have free will, and I would just laugh at him and say that you don't understand anything about physics. All this idea of electron having free will just comes from half-assed understanding of what physics is really telling us. I was not sympathetic at all. Now, of course, the way it turned out in my own thinking after my great insight is that electrons don't really have free will, but we do. And we don't do it ordinarily. We don't have it in our ego, but we do have it in what mystics call the God or cosmic consciousness. We can call it quantum consciousness. Then we do have it. Our free will is identical with God's will. An electron, when it goes from one orbit to another, it does not go through the intervening space. Can you believe it? It does not go through the intervening space. Now, I'm sure you cannot jump like that, but you can in your mind. This is the thing. Creativity that we are talking about is mental creativity, creativity of the mind, about thought. You can take a discontinuous jump in thought. And that discontinuous jump is the discovery of the new context for looking at things. In the 70s, this phrase was created by Fred Alan Wolf, and it of course is a very exciting phrase, but it also produced a lot of mischief. The phrase was, we create our own reality. When the idea comes that consciousness chooses out of possibilities and make actual events, it's a natural conclusion. We choose our own reality. We choose what we create. We manifest things according to our choice. But the choice is not the choice of individual egos. This we missed in the 70s. Intentions do work. Ordinary ego intentions don't work because we never go beyond the ego. But if we can somehow manifest collective consciousness, manifest non-local consciousness, make our intentions on the basis of non-local consciousness, if our individual intention resonate with non-local consciousness by some means or other, then intentions can come true. For example, when we pray, if you watch carefully, if you listen carefully to what the prayer groups actually do, you will notice that at the end of the prayer, they surrender to God. They will say, thy will be done. Or they will say, if it be thy will. So they know, the spiritual groups, from their own experience, purely empirically, that it is not my will but thy will. Only if my intention resonates with the intention of the whole, intention of the divine, then the intention will manifest. So this distinction is an extremely important distinction. The ego, my ego holds such a tight rein on my processing the possibilities when I'm asleep that nothing can change, nothing happens. So what we have to do then is to let the ego get stirred up, some conflicts. If we can have conflict in our life and we are courageous enough not to resolve them immediately, the ego's tendency is to resolve the conflict, peace and make up. But suppose you don't do that. You just keep the conflict for a while. Because fighting can lead to new possibilities, and as soon as new possibilities come in our unconscious, guess who comes to process them? In relationship, if we accept fighting, conflict, that is one way to get out of the doldrum of the ego, the homeostasis of the ego. Ego loves the old. Who can process the new? Only God can process the new. So anytime we are creating new possibilities in our consciousness, we are inviting God. So God comes into our unconscious, the time in which we are not processing consciously, we are not converting possibility into actuality, we're just resting. In those times, we have actually surrendered ourselves to God. And God comes, and God processes in a creative quantum leap of insight. In this creative way, we become renewed. We become better than before. But now we have the conviction of the aha insight. We can use that conviction to make real changes in our life, real changes in the way we relate to others, and those real changes eventually will stick. There is another little trick in this, which is that we have to do our doing, being in the ego mode, and be in our being in the God mode, alternatively. It's neither do, nor be, but do. Yes? So I am proposing a new lifestyle, alternate being and doing. Somehow I got into talking with mystics. And one day I even went to Ojai, California to hear the mystic Krishnamurti. I liked him a lot. But still, the paradoxes remained. Now, when you embrace spirituality, one problem that repeatedly occurs, it repeatedly occurs because we are so limited in our thinking about things. We think that God should be perfect. Some people get very hung up about God being imperfect. How can God be imperfect? So when we see atrocities in our midst, like let's say the present war in Iraq, these people get very upset. God couldn't exist because how could God possibly kill so many people or allow so many people to be killed, more accurately? What they are missing is that the perfection of God exists only in the unmanifest. Consciousness is the ground of all being, and all possibilities exist in that ground of being. Certainly, when all possibilities are included in that ground of being, we have total perfection. So it is important to deal with the idea that no, God is perfect in a domain of possibilities where all possibilities exist simultaneously and nothing can happen. For happening, we need limitations to come about. Manifestation requires limitations to create time. We evolve towards perfection. This is the idea of evolution. Yes, we have a limitation in order to manifest, but then in manifestation, we try to overcome the limitations by allowing evolution. Evolution of the representation-making process, where better and better representations are made in the physical for the subtle. Instincts are a tremendous mystery to materialist thinking. We have evolved since the 18th century. You see one of those cowboy movie episodes and see for yourself. I mean, there is truth in those movies, you know. And people really were trigger happy. And they would not hesitate to kill just like that, an innocent person. But look at the 20th century, what already took place. Gandhi, a frail man, could lead a nonviolent struggle against the mighty empire of the British. Martin Luther King, similarly, with complete nonviolent movement, helped abolish racism in America in a substantial way. South Africa, apartheid, a tremendous institution, a powerful institution, was abolished via nonviolent movement. These are monumental documents that suggest violence has been much reduced in the 20th century. There are ways that these changes perpetuate in all of humanity that biologists have discovered, that quantum physics supports. We have to begin to use them. We have to begin to use them en masse. Morphogenetic fields are modified, and then society as a whole begin to inherit these morphogenetic fields to make their bodies and organs. And when that happens, then the whole society develops new capacity of developing brain circuit, of having brain circuits, which will correspond to the new behavior. So in this way, suppose we all become oriented towards positive emotions. Suppose we all start approaching problems with love. We need to get to the next step, where we value intuitions much more, to prepare the ground for supramental to come to us. Supramental will be represented in the physical. And they called it that heaven literally will be manifested on earth. Heaven will be manifested on earth. You are hearing me correctly. I was talking to a mystic friend, and this mystic friend, whose name is Joel Morwood, he started to ask some serious questions. And I was a little bit high-handed with him, because here I am, the physicist, and this fellow is just he was a filmmaker. And he had a mystical experience, so he called himself a mystic. Layperson, typically. So, you know, we physicists look at lay people, usually, at least I did at that time. Now I have more respect. I was explaining to him the nature of the quantum measurement paradox. That look at the situation when the brain looks, possibilities do convert themselves into actual events, and yet the paradox is obvious. If consciousness is brain phenomenon, how could it do it? Joel asked me, is the consciousness prior to brain or brain prior to consciousness? I said, well, you were thinking of non-local consciousness. I know all about that. But Joel was not hearing me. He said that you have a scientific blinder, and you are sifting things through that scientific blinder, and you just don't see. Consciousness is prior to everything. Consciousness is without an object and without a subject. And somehow, this broke through. He used another phrase from Sufism, very emotionally. He became very emotional and said, "There is nothing but God, Amit. There is nothing but God." That phrase, "there is nothing but God," all of a sudden broke through my dense consciousness, and I recognized that why do we do science on the materialist basis and assume that matter is the ground of all being, which gives rise to this paradox? Why can't consciousness be the ground of all being? That which we call God, which is another name for consciousness, if that is the ground of all being, and if matter is made of consciousness, then consciousness can choose from these possibilities of its own the actual event without ever having any dualism. Question of dualism disappears just like fog in the morning sun. I was so profoundly happy. And later on, when I went outside, everybody was asleep in that house. And I look at the sky. And in the night sky, I could see a little bit of trace of the Milky Way. Quantum activism is the idea of bringing the transformative value of these messages in our own lives and in our society. Sometimes we have even missed the idea that we really are interconnected with each other. So therefore, being violent is outrageous. It's out of the question because we are violating ourselves. We are connected. We all want to change. We all want to change society. There is no question that certain things in today's society are not working. We have global warming, we have terrorism, we have democracy, which is so much influenced by media and money that we have lost faith in our politicians. Economics is producing, once again, huge gaps between the wealthy and the rest of the society, which is reminiscent of feudal societies once again. These threats makes it imperative that we try to change the society. But how are we going to change the society without understanding what has caused this degeneration? We have to recognize that it is the materialist worldview which has severed our contact, our connection with consciousness as a whole. If the environment is destroyed, that is a sure sign of separateness. We are not seeing that environment is us. We and the environment are not separate. If I see unity, then I see that I must protect the environment. The idea for a quantum activist is to recognize that these material values are dominating the society. We are not at change yet. We have to ourselves recognize that we too have hidden materialist tendency in the way that we approach things. We too often cater to negative emotions rather than positive, and therefore we need to change first. We need to be inclined towards positive. If our own heart is open, if we are approaching things with love, other people will pick it up. These ideas have not really made much mark in spite of the fact that teachers like Jesus, teachers like Buddha have told us repeatedly. Jesus said clearly, love your enemy, right? Jesus is not saying that you'll be satisfied if you can love your friend, that's enough. Jesus is not satisfied with that. Jesus is saying, love your enemy. But can we love our enemy today? We hesitate. Well, maybe, maybe Jesus was a little bit out of it when he said that. No, Jesus knew what he was doing. He knew that we are interconnected even with our enemy, and therefore we'll be killing ourselves if we kill our enemy. That's why love your enemy is the only way. But this sounds so lofty because we are in our mind. We are still evolving in our mind. And we are at a stage of mental evolution where we try to solve every problem by our rationality. And this is not enough. This is not enough. We have to change in such a way that the transformative power of quantum physics comes into our life. Non-locality of consciousness and discontinuity in creativity. This is quantum activism. We have to change in such a way that evolution is accelerated, not ignored. It is indeed very similar to what mystics tell us constantly. Start with yourself. Only if you change, the world can change eventually. We are just taking it a little bit further. Not only you start with yourself, but you always remember others. In the olden days, we were satisfied by having a model of spirituality where I change and I eventually go to heaven and I don't care about you. This will not do because you are also me. You and I are connected. If you can't go, I can't go either. This concept has existed in some traditions. In Buddhism, indeed, there is a concept of bodhisattva where a being becomes so evolved in love that the being literally says that, okay, if you don't go to heaven, I won't go. I'll just stay at the doorway. But still, even that is not enough. This is why the phrase walk the talk developed, very welcome word, welcome phrase in our culture. So let's walk our talk and make brain circuits of positive emotions. We just do it, we practice. If some of us could be good, do good, practice do regularly, be with God some of the time, be in ego some of the time, and let the dance generate creative acts of transformation. That if we do just a certain threshold, I think very quickly we can achieve the power of downward causation in unprecedented numbers. A threshold that will carry us towards making that fundamental step that these changes will take hold in all of humanity, just not in a few of us. But the few of us will start this. I invite you to be a quantum activist with this resolution, with this objective in mind. We can change ourselves and we can change the world simultaneously. Good? We did good? Wonderful. Yes. How is this sounding? Good? Wonderful. Ready? tendency that God bless me and nobody else has to go. It's separateness that gives us suffering. If you don't have that separateness, just take the instance of when you have a cup of coffee. Thank you. That's my talk tonight.